Good morning. I'm glad to see, let's see, do I need a microphone? No, that's a light. That's not a microphone. I'm glad to see everyone coming in. We have to keep moving on time today because we have to be out of this auditorium at 12:30. So that means nobody can go late, and we may have to entertain speakers' questions this afternoon. So I do want to get started with announcements and introductions. One of the things I wanted to mention, because it hasn't come up before, is that next year's seminar will not be in October, as you're all used to. So just so you can mark your calendars, next year's seminar will be a joint one with the National American Glass Club, and it will be held May 30th, 31st, June 1st, and 2nd here in Corning. The Glass Club seminars, as you know, are usually in April or May. So just in case you were expecting to come back here in October, our seminar next year will be in the spring, and you might want to make hotel reservations if you think you'll be coming, because I know that was a problem this year. Now, Louise Mayo asked me to make a couple more announcements about today. Because there are no formal programs this afternoon, she just wanted me to remind you that from 2 to 4, Thomas G. Hawks will be available to talk to you in the Crystal City exhibit. There will be demonstrations at the studio from 2:30 to 4:30, and an open house in the Raycow Library from 5 to 7. In the case of Hawks and the demonstrations, and also the open house, there are not formal programs, so you don't have to be there from 2 to 4 or from 2:30 to 4:30. Just come and go at those venues as you wish. And the library will be open from 5 to 7. Tomorrow, there's a video at 9:30 in the morning on glass engraving. That's in the Nature of Glass Theater, and in case you find that a confusing description, that's the theater which is right behind the admissions desk in the front lobby. You go up an escalator behind the admissions desk. So when you come in tomorrow morning, that's the theater. Normally it shows a film on an introduction to glass, but at 9:30 tomorrow morning it will be showing a special video on glass engraving for us. Tomorrow afternoon's bus tour of sites in Corning, we will have a bus outside. They will actually take place twice. We'll have a bus outside the old front entrance, that is the parking lot of the museum, at 1:30 tomorrow. Now, some of you, there are more registrants for seminar than we can accommodate on 2 of these trips. Those of you who checked off specifically that you wanted to come to the bus tour, have a seat. Those of you who did not specifically check off that you want to come to the bus tour, come, and we'll seat as many of you as we can, but it will have to be on a first-come, first-served basis. So I think we can accommodate about 90 people on the 2 bus tours. Okay. Now, I think everyone is here. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, who is Norma Jenkins, whom those of you who've been coming to Corning for a while probably have known. Norma's first job right out of college was as a librarian for Corning and Corning Glassworks at their business library, and at that time she helped the then Corning librarian Catherine Mack set up the library of the Corning Museum of Glass. Subsequently, she came to the Corning Museum of Glass Library full-time. She was our librarian from 1966. She became head librarian, and she finally retired in 1994. That's right, isn't it? 94. And she saw the library grow a great deal in that time period, both in terms of possessions and in terms of space. Since she retired, she has been acting as a volunteer at the Leitner Museum in Florida, where I know they're very happy to have her. And one of her more recent accomplishments, which I don't think is listed in her biography, is that as a volunteer for the Corning Museum of Glass a year and a half ago, she spent many, many hours researching the dates and the pictures on the timeline which you see going around the gallery. We would not have been able to do that had it not been for her efforts in gathering the pictures for us. So we're grateful for that. Now, I know that she has a lot to say because we asked her to do this research, and everything that's ever been published about the Elmira glass cutting firms could probably be put in about 4 pages and ready. And Norma has come up with hundreds of slides and hundreds of new facts, and I know that you're anxious to hear them.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. This morning I'm going to discuss the 3 cutting shops of the Elmira, New York area: Elmira Cut Glass Company, Enterprise Cut Glass of Elmira Heights, and Majestic Cut Glass, three of the many small companies that grew up around a major producer of blanks, and as a result of the supply of skilled labor trained in large cutting shops. That these three companies were typical of many, many small cut glass houses in this time period is what makes the story worth hearing. I'm not going to show you a single piece that belonged to a Roman emperor or even to the Elector of Saxony. Elmira is just 20 miles east of Corning. Today, the commerce between the two cities is considerable, but it was not negligible in the era of the connecting trolley. First, I want to pay tribute to those who have helped me, for nothing is a solo effort. And in every case, I strove to extend the information in Revy, whose American cut and engraved glass must have been a monumental effort, and upon which we all build. In my case, I also had Farrar and Spillman's The Complete Cut and Engraved Glass of Corning, and I also used Spillman's latest, The American Cut Glass Industry, T.G. Hawks, and his competitors, to provide a framework. An unsigned article in the December 1981 Hobstar intimates that Elmira glass may be lurking in most collections, unidentified as it was in mine. This piece is how this lecture got started, with a piece of Elmira cut glass in pattern number 100, handed down from my mother. When the Eastern Lakes chapter of the ACGA came to Corning in the 1980s to help sort the Hawks archives, a luncheon salad was in this bowl. Joan Randall subsequently supplied the identification of the pattern, and I haven't had the courage to use it since. The certificate of incorporation for the Elmira Glass Cutting Company, which later changed its name to the Elmira Cut Glass Company, so they're one and the same, was dated the 28th of June, 1899. This man, John C. Ferris, was its president. I am indebted to John C.'s great-grandson who supplied this slide. The other principals were Joel E. Ferris, his father, George R. Ferris, his brother, and Benjamin F. Levy, the company lawyer. They each had 5 shares of stock of a par value of $100 each. Hence, the corporation would begin business with $2,000. By January 1902, they had increased their total capitalization to $15,000 with the same stockholders. We assume that John C. Ferris was trained in Corning. The Crockery and Glass Journal in July 14, 1898, in their initial announcement of the formation of the company, states that the designing of the cut glass is done entirely by George Ferris. It is not unlikely that either John or George or both were trained at Hoare, although I have been unable to prove or disprove this. Their father, living in Elmira, was not a glass man, but supplied capital, as did their lawyer. The information we have on the company for the next 6 years is sparse indeed. Revy says nothing of these years. Craig Carlson, who has very graciously shared with me the results of his research regarding these 3 Elmira companies, found what I consider to be the single most important piece of information on this company. The May 1907 Glass and Pottery World says in reference to Elmira, quote, "For 8 years, and that would have been virtually since 1899 or the beginning of the company, for 8 years since they have cut almost exclusively for the Wanamaker stores, not selling to anyone else in New York or Philadelphia." Now, this was news to us, and I think it explains so very much about this company. The article goes on to say, "They are expected to enlarge their plant and may then cater to the general trade to some extent. They own special molds and produce excellent glass. In September 1908, the same journal reports, the Elmira Cut Glass Company are now after the trade of the exclusive China stores and the best department stores, with a line said by a crucial buyer, a critical buyer, to be fully equal in finish to the best glass ever shown in the United States. Serendipity provided corroboration of the Wanamaker's story. The Leitner Museum in St. Augustine, Florida, had received a gift of cut glass in January of 1999. This is a nice cream tray from that gift. As we worked with the pieces of this gift, we found that roughly half the glass was cut in known Elmira patterns. This was an example of pattern number 17. The provenance supplied by the very old lady who donated it was, "We lived in New York. My father went to the store and bought it." This was highly suggestive of its origin, but far from proof. Better yet was a recent acquisition of the Rakow Library. It is a Wanamaker's catalog of china, cut glass, artwares, and lamps, undated, but issued shortly after the building in New York City was completed in September 1907. Isn't that a great match? What a thrill it was to get my hands on this catalog. And if that weren't enough, here's a nappy from the very same picture of the catalog. Now, if any of you in the audience are silently muttering, but Wanamaker's was in Philadelphia, you're absolutely right, but it was also in New York. Starting in 1896 with the purchase of the A.T. Stewart department store on Lower Broadway. Then in September 1907, it opened a new 16-story building across the street, connected by underground passageways and an artistic double-decker covered bridge, known as the Bridge of Progress. The entire third floor of the new Wanamaker's building was devoted to china, glass, lamps, and artwares. And the preface to this catalog states, by absorbing the entire output of one large cut glass factory, as well as a large proportion of several others, we are able to quote prices on cut glass of the highest quality that are consistently 25% lower than those regularly prevailing elsewhere. This splendid object is the Corning Museum of Glass's punch bowl, also cut in pattern number 17. In this case, I can say a bit more. Now, it's always a chancy business citing the sources of cut glass blanks that a cutting shop acquired. My personal feeling is that a shop got them wherever they could, and I can offer quotes from the trade literature to support that point of view. However, a previously underused source in the Rakow Library, that is, the Hoare template books, gives us some interesting clues. Now let me explain what a template book is. Cutting shops kept track of what blanks were purchased from which hot glass houses by means of full-sized, cut-out outline drawings. Hoare pasted these into large loose-leaf notebooks. So it is from data in the Hoare template books that I can say with a reasonable degree of assurance that blanks for this two-piece punch bowl came from Fry. Therein, dated the 16th of February, 1912, it is noted that Hoare made use of this blank as well. Elmira itself issued a catalog. While undated, it must have been printed after their new building was completed. This is the new building, which was occupied in the middle of April 1909 and cost $10,000. The catalog has 44 numbered pages and illustrates 28 different cutting patterns. I'll be showing you a sampling of these patterns, more or less in numerical order. This is a typical pattern page showing pattern number 22 in the lower left and pattern number 23 in the upper right and upper left. Because Elmira didn't have the marketing savvy, having long been sheltered in the protective arms of Wanamaker's, they didn't give their patterns appealing and memorable names. And so we are stuck with numbers, which are not nearly as much fun as names for collectors. Oh boy. You're looking at pattern number 14 now, also from the gift to the Lightner. This pattern is illustrated but once in the Elmira catalog by a celery tray just like this. The pattern is distinctive with the crossing bands of hobs outlining a huge central hob star. This is pattern number 16 from the Wanamaker's catalog. If there are any in the audience new to pattern identification, this picture is a cautionary tale. The side of the bowl looks entirely different from the view looking down into one of the dishes. Continuing to pattern number 33, we have this jug from the collection of Warren Biden and Teddy Steele of Portland, Oregon. And as you see, the picture in the catalog page over there, farthest to your left, is exactly the same pattern and identified as pattern number 33. With the Wanamaker's catalog issued in 1907 and the Elmira catalog in 1909, this lovely young thing, together with the rest of the female members of the family, illustrates exactly the sort of customer that Elmira was attempting to lure into their handsome new showroom. On to pattern 41, this very handsome jug from the Lightner Museum. This is another case where I feel that the blank can confidently be attributed to Union Glass Company based on the information in the Hoare template books. Again, it is a blank used by both Hoare and Elmira. This is pattern number 51, courtesy of our Portland friends. And you see a good representation of this pattern on the far left in the claret jug. It was $14 in 1907, which is $252 now, a substantial price for a very handsome piece. This is pattern number 67 from the Lightner Museum, and its counterpart is the exact counterpart over there on the left from the Wanamaker's catalog. Now, because pattern number 67 is sometimes called a cluster variation, I'm showing you a genuine Egginton cluster, and you decide, well, maybe I'm not. The jug here and the center jug show exactly the same pattern. Now let's try for the cluster. There, that's the Egginton cluster, and you can decide whether or not that is a useful comparison. With Elmira's pattern number 80, we return to what I think of as more formulaic cutting. Well, let's see what turns up. There is the ice tub number 80. Now, I think this is just formulaic cutting and rather ordinary. And on the other side, you have the catalog page showing showing pieces in pattern number 80. We know from the Hoare template books that Fry made a blank for one of Elmira's ice tubs, but not this one. Now we reach pattern number 100, courtesy of our Portland friends. This is the trumpet face, and this is a detail of the cutting on it. Another pattern 100 is from the Leitner Group, which was purchased at Wanamaker's. And here is yet another shape in pattern 100. While this shape is not in Elmira's catalog, two pictures of this piece in both this shape and this cutting are shown in Glass and Pottery World for October 1907, where it is called a fruit bowl compote. Hence, thanks to Craig Carlson and Warren Biden, we have a firmly dated piece. I think it very likely that Union Glass Company made the blank for this piece. And then we get to Design K, a new manner of indicating pattern names. This is the only picture in the catalog of an alphabetically numbered pattern. There are no A through J's and no L through Z's that anyone has ever been able to find. In the Elmira catalog, the frequency of illustration of a given pattern may give us an indication of the relative popularity of the said pattern. By a wide margin, a full 24% of the pictures in the Elmira catalog were pattern number 33, as represented by this. The second most frequently illustrated pattern is that of pattern number 100. And this piece was part of the Leitner's gift as purchased at Wanamaker's. Pattern number 100 was also given a full-page spread in the Wanamaker's catalog. And the third most often pictured is pattern number 17, with 9% of the pictures in the catalog. Wanamaker's featured this pattern with 2 full pages, plus an occasional appearance in a group of assorted patterns. So we have the situation of a mere 3%, 3 patterns taking up 51% of the illustrations in Elmira's own catalog. I would guess that roughly the same pattern frequency would obtain among the Elmira cut glass in collectors' hands today. And I'll be interested to have you tell me if I'm way off base here. In their December 1911 advertisements in the Elmira papers, Elmira Cut Glass announced their new floral designs. I've never seen an Elmira floral cut piece. In fact, I didn't know until recently that Elmira did floral cutting. But I hope you will turn up some. Without pictures and without mention in a catalog, history of the ownership is the only way we're going to be sure. There's more information to be found in the template books. There are 96 instances of the joint use of the same blank by Elmira and J. Hoare. That is, it breaks down into 34 that do not cite the manufacturer of the blank, 18 from Steuben, 18 from Fry, 13 from Union, 5 from Pearpoint, and 8 imported. From this information, we know that, in addition to those cited previously, Elmira's large cigar jar is a Fry blank, and that the Elmira ice cream tray that I showed you at the beginning of this sequence was most likely made by Union. Another clue to be reaped from the template books concerns the relationship between the Ferrises and J. Hoare and Company. I've already mentioned that I thought one or more of the brothers may have learned the glass cutting trade there. But by the very frequency of mention of the use of the same blanks by Hoare and Elmira, much more so than between any other cutting shop and Hoare, we begin to suspect a special relationship. It has been stated in print that Hoare purchased Elmira in 1913. It has also been stated in print that Elmira Cut Glass Company was a subsidiary of J. Hoare and Company in 1913. On April 12th of that year, there was a document known as a DBA, a doing business as, filed in the Steuben County Clerk's office that states that John C. Ferris and George R. Ferris, residents of the city of Corning, Steuben County, New York, are conducting a glass business in the Hermans and Lawrence building in the city of Corning under the firm name and style of Ferris Brothers Cut Glass Company. My conclusion and interpretation from this and other evidence is that while Elmira Cut Glass Company disappeared as a corporate entity, it was never operated as a subsidiary of Hoare except in 1913. As for the Ferris brothers, less than a week after the above DBA was filed, a fire struck their rented building, doing them some $2,000 worth of damage. While it had been thought that this, in essence, signaled the end of the Ferris Cut Glass Company, except as a shop specializing in repair work, I find that they advertised vigorously in the Elmira newspaper for the 1913 Christmas season, mentioning rich, sparkling cut glass from the Ferris Corning factory. They had a display within another store on Elmira's Main Street. The same situation held true for December 1914. But by the holiday season of 1915, the same store was advertising cut glass by J. Hoare and Company. So eventually the end came. Ferris descendants tell me that John C. Ferris engaged in the selling of guava jelly in an effort to pay off his debts, which eventually he did. The 1920 census lists him as selling canned goods. Thereafter, he went to Brooklyn and engaged in other entrepreneurial activities. What preceded 1913 was a history of chronic labor problems for Elmira throughout its life, flaring sometime into the acute. I'm not going to chronicle this back and forth movement of the company, whose usual reaction to trouble was to threaten to move to Corning, and I think several times they did move to Corning and then they moved back. But for example, in 1910, in the autumn or late fall, there was a strike of several weeks. Local civic leaders met with union and management. Results at a compromise failed, largely it seems, at this distance in time, because of John C. Ferris's continuing determination that I will not preside over a union shop. I should mention that in addition to his determination, he had a good argument on his side when he pointed out that he paid a higher wage scale than all but 5% of the other cutting shops in the country. All but 2 of the other cutting shops in the country. And those paid 5% more, but their plants were in operation only part of the year. Now on to Enterprise Cut Glass of Elmira Heights. Let me introduce you to 2 of the founding fathers of Enterprise Cut Glass, Mr. George Gaylord and James W. Bennett, president and treasurer respectively. This is from a cartoon from a locally renowned cartoonist, Eugene Zimmerman. It's from a 1912 booklet called A Foolish History of Elmira and Its Tributaries. The title itself is sort of a joke, since Elmira isn't a river and it doesn't have any tributaries. Mr. Bennett probably learned cutting in Corning, although I have not been able to determine where. In the 1895 Corning City Directory, he is listed as a glass cutter. Gaylord probably learned his trade in the White Mills, Honesdale area. In the early years of the 20th century, they were both in Philadelphia and probably met at the Quaker City Glass Works, where we know Gaylord was employed. Enterprise Cut Glass of Honesdale, Pennsylvania, bought its land in Elmira Heights on the 12th of June in 1906. Their certificate of incorporation had the company beginning with the actual amount of capital of $11,900. There were 5 original stockholders, Gaylord and Bennett, plus William Loring of Elmira Heights, as well as Frederick C. Farnham and Pearson B. Peterson of Honesdale, who was the largest stockholder. The company began cutting later that year. Now, I've been fortunate to discover the daughter of Mr. Bennett, a gracious lady whose memory does her proud and who is the owner of the Enterprise Cut Glass I'll be showing, all of which is reputed to have been cut by Mr. Bennett himself. She was born in 1908 in Elmira Heights, where the family lived only a few blocks from the factory. Because the child suffered from motion sickness, it was the practice of her mother, whenever she needed to take the trolley to Elmira to shop or to attend to business, to take the child to the factory where the office girls would look after her for a couple of hours. Hence, the daughter has a wonderfully clear memory of the factory. She described it to me without any prompting on my part, and I recognized it immediately from all the pictures I have seen. Now, this is not Enterprise, but a cutting shop of a slightly earlier period, but I show it to you to give you the general idea of the cutters sitting in front of the windows. The granddaughter further described the existence of a room where the men wore long rubber aprons and I wasn't allowed to go in, obviously the acid dipping room. But her most vivid memory is the showroom, a room without windows lined with black velvet, where the glass was lighted so that it shone like diamonds. Having seen a very similar showroom in my various glass factory visits, I believe this to be accurate as well. In assigning me today's topic, Jane explained that one of my missions was to find an Enterprise catalog. I accepted and then wished I could self-destruct because I have been unsuccessful. I did, however, come close. Mr. Bennett's daughter remembers distinctly throwing away her copy. She wanted the leather covers for her music. And it's a great story, but unfortunately it doesn't make any slides. I mention this because, as you all know, the only way to positively identify unmarked glass, such as this, is through comparison with known catalogs or illustrations in books, or finding a collection of impeccable provenance. Hence, until a copy of the Elmira catalog comes to light, the pictures in Revy and other glass books, and this family collection, which I am showing you the larger pieces, constitute the only verified example of Enterprise cut glass now known. This piece, with the sunburst motif, closely resembles a different sunburst piece pictured in Revy. There is only one mention in the literature, in Glass and Pottery World in October 1907, of a trademark on Enterprise cut glass. And since no other mention exists, I'm inclined to side with all the other published authors who state that Enterprise had no trademark. It's possible that they used a pasted-on paper label for a short time, and all of these paper labels have now disappeared. This is a handsome 12-inch vase with the same motif on all sides. This is a splendid 16-inch vase with different motifs on adjoining sides. And I think you can see that here. In a smallish company such as Enterprise, the officers had to do at least double and more likely multiple duty. In October 1910, in connection with a story on a strike at the factory, Mr. Bennett was listed as Superintendent Bennett. At this time, Enterprise made the opposite choice from Elmira. The company capitulated to demands to affiliate with the American Flint Glass Workers Union. This is confirmed both by local newspaper stories and by help-wanted ads for roughers and smoothers accustomed to flower patterns, which appeared in the American Flint, the house organ of the National Union. His daughter, Mr. Bennett's daughter, tells me that he had several trips per year to the Midwest, including St. Louis, Chicago, and Minneapolis, where he would set up his samples in a hotel and then go get jewelry store buyers in a hack, and she was very specific about this, and bring them to the hotel. Now, this is not Enterprise, but rather a salesman for Hawks and Steuben, but I show it to you as an example of what I'm sure she meant. You see the salesman and his ware spread out on tables. You see the open catalog, and then in the foreground, don't fail to see his bedpost. Mr. George Gaylord, meantime, was making periodic trips to New York City, often announced in the pages of Pottery Glass and Brass Salesman with the words such as, "Mr. George Gaylord will again personally exhibit the line in New York at the Marlborough Hotel, and extends a cordial invitation to visiting merchants and buyers. Remember that no figured blanks are used in our entire product." This latter line was repeated in every one of their advertisements so often and so vigorously that I'm inclined to believe that they can be believed on this point. As is well known, glass companies responded to changing times, and by the second decade of the 20th century were showing lighter glass with predominantly floral cuttings. I think this is a particularly interesting 8-inch vase because one side is brilliant cut, the opposite side has floral cutting. And this is all the same piece. This is an example of an entirely floral piece. Now, we've been brainwashed to look down on these, but taken by itself and not comparing it with rich cut glass, this piece is really quite charming. And these two pieces are delightful as well. I'm not calling them great. I'm saying that they are very attractive on their own modest terms. The handled nappy is probably in the pattern named by Revy, Wildflower and Butterfly. There is modest geometric cutting along the sides of the rectangular piece, which the owner insists was a tray for small spoons. This 8-inch bowl is probably in the Rambler Rose pattern. During the 1910-1914 period, Enterprise advertised heavily in the trade journal Pottery Glass and Brass Salesman. It's not hard to see a direct connection between the high level of advertising and the frequent mention of Enterprise in the editorial columns. Elmira is rarely mentioned and Majestic never. Neither are there advertisements from either of the latter. In August 1910, Enterprise had a front cover display of 2 pieces of Rambler Rose in this journal. From the same trade journal, December 22nd, 1910. A few months later, in February 1911. But there's another point of view. Part of an interview with William F. Dorflinger in December 1911, and I quote, "One of our great troubles today is the insatiable demands for new styles and patterns. The traveling man must not carry a second time a design he has shown before. It is necessary, too, for the manufacturer to carry an enormous stock. The dealer kindly allows us to and even insists upon it. Meanwhile, Enterprise soldiered on. The same magazine, September 1911. In all, there were 16 advertisements in pottery, glass, and brass in the same magazine for Enterprise Cut Glass, all of them for Rambler Rose. Again, the same magazine, August 1912. The same magazine, February 1913. But the really important information in this advertisement is complete catalog and photogravure, including all new things for the asking. How I wish I had someone to ask. Enterprise allegedly had other light-cut floral patterns, even named them after other flowers, such as aster and daisy. In May 1913, Rambler Rose was apparently still going strong, for it was praised extravagantly in the trade journal columns with the words, "This design has made cut glass history and has brought out clearly the fact that a design that is really distinctive and different was worth the making and the featuring." And they drive home this point by adding, Enterprise Cut Glass keeps over 60 frames busy the year around. But another point of view is that of James Hoare, who was the proprietor of J. Hoare after his father passed on. And he said, "Every time I go to New York City, I have to have a new line of samples. It is the only way you can make any money out of the business today." In 1914, Enterprise brought out Primrose, but had no pictures in the trade journals. And in February 1915, the same was true for Syringa, but no pictures. If any of you are mystery fans, I invite you to take up research on the Majestic Cut Glass Company of Elmira. I could certainly use the help. Majestic is not mentioned in any trade directory listings of glass companies. It is not mentioned in the Elmira nor Corning telephone books for any years. It is not mentioned in the city directories of either Elmira or Corning for any years. Now that's keeping a low profile. Majestic Cut Glass is treated in Revy with pictures of this cut glass. I have slides of it, courtesy of the Corning Museum of Glass, to whom it was donated by Mrs. Perling, daughter of the owner. Since Majestic never issued a catalog and its advertisements have no illustrations, these pictures represent the only firmly documented pieces of Majestic Cut Glass found to date. I'm going to be showing them without specific comment because I have no knowledge of what their pattern names were. As Revy says, Majestic was incorporated in May 1907 with Wolf M. Spiegel, the father, and two of his children, Saul and Martha, as directors. It was capitalized at $10,000, but began business with $500, according to the local newspapers. These incorporation documents do exist, and you can imagine my relief when I saw them. All three principals were already involved in the existing business begun by Wolf M. Spiegel in 1895. That business was listed in 1901 as a wholesale dealer in scrap iron, metal, rubber, rags, hides, furs, beeswax, tallow, ginseng, and so forth. By 1912, it was listed as dealer in scrap iron, junk, and machinery. The first mention we have of Majestic is in the trade journal Glass and Pottery World for May 1907, which mentions that Saul Spiegel was to be the superintendent, acid dipper, and salesman. This gives us the clue that he himself was not a glass cutter. So how could he be, having spent his working life to date with his father in the scrap business? From the trade journals, we have our only clue about the demise of Majestic. The brief note in Pottery and Glass for September 1909 says that 2 expert glass company cutters, employees of Spiegel, have purchased the machinery from Spiegel, who has closed his plant. The machinery has already been transferred. So you might think that was the end of Majestic. Did it ever exist in Elmira? Yes, based on this note about the sale of their machinery and the advertisements in the local newspapers, which invited the general public to visit the glass factory and see glass being cut. But although I believe the evidence is sufficient that it ended cutting in Elmira in mid-1909, did that end its corporate life? A resounding no. From the following, we can only assume that it was labor problems that allegedly brought Majestic Cut Glass to Corning in mid-1909. Literally, the only time the Majestic name appeared in the newspapers, except in an advertisement, is an offhanded mention in the Elmira Advertiser in the midst of a discussion of one of Elmira Cut Glass Company's periodic removes from Elmira to Corning as a result of labor problems. The writer says, quote, "The trouble experienced by the Ferris interests seems to be a sequel of the difficulties of the Majestic Cut Glass Company a few years ago, which resulted in the firm removing to Corning, where it is now enjoying a flourishing business." What of the evidence of Majestic's own advertisements? It was Majestic's practice to rent a storefront in Elmira at the Christmas holidays and to advertise their product heavily in the local newspapers at that time, including on into early January. These advertisements, as were those of the other 2 cutting shops discussed, were disguised as and almost indistinguishable from editorial material. Usually, they must be read very carefully for any reference to Majestic Cut Glass. Often the address of the store they rented, which was typically on East Water Street, which was also the address, East Water Street, of Elmira Cut Glass, was the only reference as to where to come in and get this fantastic factory bargain. During the 1909 and 1910 holiday seasons, and to a lesser extent in December 1911, Majestic advertised Corning cut glass, sometimes with a capital C and capital G for cut glass, and sometimes with small letters. For example, on December 21st, they say, "Sold all over the world, Corning Rich Cut Glass. We have received from our factory in Corning some new shapes and designs." No seconds, and then just the address. There were numerous references such as "direct from our factory" and "have no wish to return this to our factory in Corning" and "new examples from our factory." In December 1910, a Majestic advertisement in the Elmira paper shouts, "New designs, sparkling colors. We do not carry seconds." And since there's no mention of Spiegel nor of the Majestic name, only the address gives us the clue that this is not Elmira Cut Glass Company. What did these 3 companies have in common, and what makes them so typical of others? Item 1. Written vertically in the margin alongside the official record of the incorporation of each is the succinct notice, "Dissolved per proclamation of the governor, filed July 2nd, 1928, Asfa B. Hall, clerk." Clearly an example of New York State cleaning out its files. What went wrong? Why did they each fail after a relatively few years? All agree that there was no single cause, but a mixture of several, probably operative in a different mixture for each company. Each was subject to some degrees to the natural disasters, fire and flood, that seemed to plague glass factories. and each was subject to the conditions listed here. As for competition, I had a moment when I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to have the audience vote on these? But frankly, cooler heads prevailed. Every company has competition, and they can hardly have expected anything else. In the case of Elmira, this factor may have been mitigated or nearly absent during its first 8 years, when Wanamaker's took almost all their production without any promotional effort on Elmira's part. Later, they employed an agent to do their selling. Yet, since no national advertising on their part, either in the trade journals or the consumer magazines, is to be found, one gets the feeling that promotion was not part of their business plan. Even after 1908, I find advertisements only in the local Elmira papers, where the ads sometimes had pictures, but pictures so generic or poor or both that no pattern identification can be attempted from those pictures. While Elmira's advertisements contain no reference to local competitors by name, in December 1909, they say a bit sharply, "Do not be deceived, and remember that the only factory sale in the city is ours," an obvious reference to Majestic. Another kind of competition arose in the form of the continuous cheapening of cut glass by other companies. These under discussion were competing for the middle-level glass market, which was being nibbled away at the bottom by advertisements such as this. I'm going to talk about a similar advertisement in the same journal, which was the same sort of thing. There's a long, lovely description of how cut glass is made and how beautiful it is, and then there's the complicated business of how to get it. The bowl plus a subscription for $3.10, or the bowl free for anyone sending in a club of 11 subscribers, or the bowl free for anyone sending in a club of 22 subscribers, and so on. Coming down to the berry bowl without any subscriptions, $2.75. Now, this is not as outrageous as it sounds, since in today's dollars, $2.75 would be $47.50. But as a final example, in May 1913, the Bush Cut Glass Company, with the slogan, "There are more people with $2 to spend for cut glass than there are with $5, advertised to the trade 66 different pieces of cut glass to retail at $1.49 each, which would bring a profit of 55% to the retailer. Style changes may be thought of another form of competition. These Elmira companies entered the business too late to enjoy the heyday, the high point of popularity of rich cut glass enjoyed by such companies as Hawks and Hoare. And consider the allure of this seductive punch bowl in carnival glass by Northwood. See if you can't visualize the heart-grabbing appeal of an item such as this. Of course, this was unabashedly top of the line carnival glass. Art Nouveau, late in reaching these shores, but making up for that by lingering longer, was a serious style competitor as well. If you think I'm in grave error for thinking that Art Nouveau influence was still here at so late a date, let me point out that the cover of the Elmira Free Academy, a local high school in Elmira, the cover of their yearbook in 1911 had a rampantly Art Nouveau cover. Even objects of the Arts and Crafts School, touting hand-hewn, handcrafted by honest workmen from natural materials, began competing for the home decorating dollar during this time. By 1917, times had changed, not the least ladies' styles. the cutting shops could no longer count on blanks arriving from the factories of France and Belgium and England. Raw material shortages, specifically potash, precluded the manufacture of blanks in this country, even if the manufacturers had not been engaged in producing essentials for the war effort. This sounded the death knell for enterprise, as well as for a host of other small cutting shops. An editorial on the condition of business in April 1917 states flatly, "Trade in the warerooms is undeniably dull. Retail trade has undoubtedly fallen off materially. The women who do the real buying for the ultimate consumer show a timidity which the men do not seem to share. Along the eastern coast, the women are preparing for war. There is no question but that a lot of money which would go into crockery is going into bandages." Now, management decisions. My favorite cause is this. Of course, it doesn't stand alone, but is the manner in which the company reacted to all of those factors. I've mentioned the accepted wisdom that Elmira fell victim to its labor problems. And I trust I've tediously driven home my point that enterprise continued to cling to its Rambler Rose pattern against the perceived wisdom of the day. But likely it was war shortages and a winter blizzard that badly damaged their roof that forced enterprise into bankruptcy in 1917. Two of these companies were founded by glass workers, some with more management or business experience than others. A quote from pottery, glass, and brass salesmen says it all. "There is no industry connected with the trade in which so little capital is required to start in business as that of cut glass. The ancient trade joke of the manufacturer whose equipment consisted in a combination folding bed at night and a glass cutting frame in the daytime is unfortunately all too true." And what about the phantom factory, Majestic? Majestic continued to retail cut glass at Christmas time from a temporarily rented storefront. This it advertised unabashedly as Corning cut glass available at factory prices from 1909 to at least December 1911, more than 2.5 years after they ceased production in Elmira. However, the parent company, Wolf, Spiegel and Sons, continued until the second generation, in the fullness of their years, sold the business in 1975. But the name and the business address are still the same in the Elmira telephone book under scrap metal. I think they were the smart ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norma. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions and mob Norma at the coffee break. Let her get a cup of coffee first. So we will release you, and we'll expect you back here promptly at 10:30. We have 2 more lectures, and then we have to be out of here at 12:30. Thank you.
Glass Company.